So I'm here with Mr. Gareth Davies. Hi, Mr. Davies. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Bienvenuto a Roma,
Very good, very good. I was just chatting with Mr. Davies, and he was saying me he knows Italian. So may I ask you, how come you know Italian?
Well, I did a degree, my university degree, my first degree was in Spanish with Italian, but they're so, we would say, semejante, similar,
Yes.
that in my fourth year, I just finished with Spanish in the end, but I studied here in Rome 30 years ago as part of my university degree, and my mother's from Naples, but grew up in England, so, you know, I'm in my 50s and I've got hair like an Italian, I think, you know. So, no, I love Italy. It's a great country, and to be here in Rome is fantastic, you know. It's absolutely fantastic. It's a beautiful place.
And have you ever been covering news, MMA events here in Italy, or?
No, this is the very first time. I missed the Florence event with Bellator, and there was one other event in Torino, and I missed those two events because I cover boxing as well. And when those two events were happening, I like to try and go to all the big MMA events happening with UFC and with Bellator in Europe. But when those two events were happening, I was covering boxing in America, so I missed those. But I'm delighted to be here for the third Bellator event in Italy. My debut. My debut.
No, I don't think so. But how many years have you been covering MMA?
Since 2006, so 12 years. And for the Telegraph all that time, and obviously working in America on television in the past with Fox and ESPN, and then in the UK on television, the first ever television show on MMA in the UK back in 2007. So really, I started covering it when UFC started to become big in the UK, and they were doing 3 or 4 events a year: Manchester, Nottingham, Newcastle, London, when Michael Bisping was beginning, Dan Hardy was beginning, and it was the start really of proper coverage in the newspapers in England and on television and radio. Everybody covers it now, but when I started, no one was covering it in the major newspaper network or media network.
What did catch your attention of MMA, because it's a bit of a strange, let's say like that.
Well,
sport.
I've covered boxing for 25 years, and I've always loved combat sports. I studied martial arts in China for a year. When I finished university, I went to live in China. It's the story of people. People are interested in other people, and I find the narrative of fighters, men and women, to be fascinating. And I love the fact that people who don't know the sport think it's barbaric, it's violent, but it's not. It's a way of life. It's a calling for so many people who do it. And once you come inside the sport, there's a whole layers of transformational things going on in people's lives, and those people influence other people in a fantastic way. I think fight sports and fighting as a metaphor and actual reality of fighting, and as I say, as a metaphor, speaks to society. And it can do really good things. I did it as well, and I need to mention this. Again, I've covered Paralympic sport for 25 years, and people used to say, people with disabilities, sport, it's not interesting. But look how the Paralympic movement has grown.
Yes.
I came to the Paralympic Games in Torino in the Winter Games, and we need to report things to let the world know, and it's the same with MMA. We need to report these things with a passion. So if I was saying one thing, it's the narrative, the story of fighters' lives that I really love. That's what caught my eye. But of course, it's very exciting, and I have a passion for martial arts and fight sports.
In your opinion, what are the characteristics that a good MMA reporter has to have to be obviously a good reporter?
the same that any reporter has in any subject. This is what I believe anyway. Stamina, passion, and bringing your passion to the broadcasts, to the radio, to the TV, to the newspaper that you believe you carry for travelling around to cover these events. I mean, I think the qualities that an MMA reporter needs, I think a big word is empathy. You know, anyone can sit on social media platforms, Twitter, on Instagram, on digital media sites and say, this guy should have done this guy should have done that. But I think in all walks of life, you need to have an empathy for the people you're writing about. Fighters fight with injuries. Fighters fight with bad things going on in the background of their lives. So it's about understanding, but also being consistent over a long period of time. Look what's happened with Ariel Helwani, for example, you know, one of my friends and rivals as well, and a good friend. He started with a show on the internet, and he's been, you know, I've been a newspaper guy for a very long time, so, you know, I've grown up as a young man being a journalist for a long time, but if anyone really stands out as a guy who's really made it, as a guy who started out in MMA and followed the course properly, it's Ariel Helwani. Now he has this great show on ESPN. The MMA Hour was brilliant. He has a show now with Chael Sonnen, who's fantastic to work with. And I think Ariel has shown, if you're starting with MMA and you want to be purely an MMA journalist, I'm a sports journalist, you know, across the board. But Ariel, for example, is an MMA journalist. Consistency over a long period of time, and getting to understand the sport and getting the trust of fighters, managers, promoters, teams, and then doing it over a long period of time. But also, I think continuing to learn and be a student of the sport, speak to the trainers, go to the gyms, and follow the rise of fighters, you know. In Italy, for example, the story, he's not a champion with a belt, but the story, for example, of Alessio Sakara, Legionarius, he's a champion. He's a people's champion. He's a champion in his heart, and you see it every time he fights, every time he talks about MMA, what he wants to create as a legacy, and how he wants young people to see that there are benefits, and as I was saying before, how the sport can be transformational for so many people's lives.
Yeah, are you one of those journalists who likes to do the picks for on the fights? Or,
yeah, I do picks. I do picks. I'm good at picking, I believe. You know, maybe 75%, because I do a podcast for the betting agent William Hill for all UFC events. That they can track me to do. I have a contract with them to do that, and yeah, I always do my picks and the betting odds for them. Yeah, I like to pick. So who are you going to ask me then?
For tomorrow. What are your picks for tomorrow? If you have done, if you have think about it, or just if you.
Which fights?
For example, the main event.
For Patricio Pitbull Freire against Daniel Weichel. I think Patricio will win this. You know, I think the Pitbull brothers used to be crazy fighters, but they've developed, they're more control, they live the life, one brother urges the other brother on. Weichel is very tough, but I do think there's something special about Patricio, and I think he'll win the title, retain the title tomorrow night.
And what about the co-main event?
With Alessio?
Yes.
Well, obviously against the Brit, Mr. Sloan.
Yeah.
Look, they're both strikers. Alessio loves to strike. Too brave. He's sometimes too brave. I think it will really deliver as an exciting fight. But I'm going Alessio. Alessio in his heart and in his head, he cannot lose in Rome. You know, this is a guy that runs around the Colosseum to train. He feels the spirit of the gladiators. He feels the spirit of the people of Rome, of the nation, of the great kind of Roman Empire. I think he'll deliver tomorrow night. I think he'll be exciting, and I think both men will really kind of throw down against each other. But I think Alessio wins by TKO in round 2.
Okay. Oh. You are actually living the MMA booming in the UK. Can you point out the ingredients of this MMA?
The boom. Well, the boom, the wave, if you like, the boom is down to personalities and characters. We had a big growth period with the popularity of Michael Bisping. Dan Hardy was fairly popular as well. But you see, when Conor McGregor came, he crossed over into the mainstream. It wasn't just sport anymore. People that weren't interested in MMA liked his style, his clothes, his attitude. And to have a boom, you need stars. Tennis boomed in the UK because of Andy Murray. There'll be a soccer boom, a football boom now because England made the last 4 teams in the World Cup. Fight sports are very big in the UK right now, and I think it's helped mixed martial arts that boxing is very big as well. You know, we have Anthony Joshua, heavyweight champion of the world, 80,000 people going to his fights. It only helps the whole spectrum. TV companies see live fight sports as a big industry. UFC is on the BT Sport platform, which is the rival to Sky Sports. There are lots of smaller organisations, BAMA, Cage Warriors. They are very consistent. They're like feeder leagues into the UFC and Bellator. So I think it's based around, again, a slow development, but also having stars. You need stars to be able to write the newspaper stories about, to generate people's interest in that person. That's how you do it. Mm-hmm. The problem we've got is that when anyone makes it big, like Darren Till at the moment, the UFC will take them to Las Vegas. He will probably fight in Las Vegas next. But I think Bellator are doing a very good job of creating new young stars, and Scott Coker, the CEO of Bellator, is telling me that we will have from October 6 events in the UK in the next year, and that's brilliant because it showcases all the young stars that they are signing at the moment to put on those cards.
Mm-hmm. Before we spoke about the qualities of an MMA reporter, but if you if you have to give a tip about MMA writing, what would it be?
Write from your heart. Write what you see. That's it. Write from your heart. Write what you see. If you have a love of the sport, back your own opinions on the sport, but be consistent. And don't be overcritical. It's very easy to be critical of fighters. And I have one real rule, which is I will only write or say when I'm on the radio, on the TV, or writing for the Telegraph newspaper, anything I write, I will say to the face of the fighter. That's my rule. Don't be brave behind the pen. Anything you write, you should be able to say to that person's face. And not only that, if you can do that, they will respect you for it. You know?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
It was a pleasure to talk with such a great MMA journalist. And let's see, we will meet again in Italy.
Mi piacere. Mi piacere. Arrivederci, ci vediamo.